Okay, now you know the drill. So what we'd like you to do is take a couple of minutes, look over your notes, and prioritize what kinds, anything else that you want to add, and then think about what would be a couple of things that you would want to share that would affirm me for things that I did that you thought were effective for any reason, particularly in our major areas of focus, which again are engagement, academic language and vocabulary, critical thinking, and scaffolded support. And then anything else. Sky's the limit, but those four we want to make sure we're all focusing on. So I'll be quiet, just quietly and independently. So now it's silent, reflection, thinking. See you in about a minute and a half. Okay, you want to be wrapping up your thoughts there? Any notes you want to make? Things that you want to share with me? Because remember, I'll be collecting these, so I'll be food for thought on the airplane. No, hold on. So we're going to do this both as a small Learning Walk team and then as a learning community writ large. So just like we did this morning, I want you to simulate. So here's Kevin, right? Here I am, so talk in the first person, not third person. So I want you to pretend that I had joined you, just like the experiences that you had here this morning. Exactly the same process. So I want you to pretend I was right there, and I want you to start just like you did a brilliant job this morning of starting by thanking me for allowing you into my classroom so we could all learn together. Why don't you guys join in right here too? And then have a round of affirmations, as specific as possible, and then a round of questions, wonderings, and suggestions. Okay, you know the routine. Somebody start off. Thank you, Kevin. Go. And when you're done with that round, a round of questions, wonderings, and suggestions. So a second round of question, wonder, and suggest together. Anything is fair game as long as, of course, it's respectful and we don't hear it. Okay, colleagues, if I could interrupt. I can and I will. I guess that's the wrong rhetorical question. I am interrupting. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Now we just want to expand it so we can have a conversation as a community, and then we want to be finished with my little lesson and start once again expanding it to the broader themes that we've observed all day long, as well as an opportunity to unpack. We actually have, we have an hour for debriefing a 25-minute lesson. So we're not going to beat this one for an hour, trust me. But we do want to have this larger conversation, and then we want to have an opportunity to go and explore as professionals, as colleagues and friends, some of the issues or questions or wonderings that have been brought up throughout the day, or things that maybe we want to go a little more deeply into, or we have a couple things that we did with 2.0 group yesterday that we could do with this group, sort of going beyond the basics of what we started here. So we got lots of ways that we could use our time, but we'll start with affirmations for me. Make me feel good. You've already done a great job of that, but it's not about, I'm just being, in part glib here, but in part it actually is, particularly for teachers that have never done this. I've done this a lot, and I have a thick skin. So I'm used to it. But you know what? When it's your first or second time, it is. And even so, I was joking with the people in the back that asked about my energy. I said, oh, it's mainly nervous energy. I mean, I've done this a lot, but I still get, this is a little, intimidating. And I could tell the kids that they were not nearly as relaxed as the kids that I saw in the other classrooms. In fact, there was a couple of kids that I recognized. But I still think they did a fabulous job. But this is, they were in the fishbowl today. Particularly when we had the camera following around. I was like, whoa, and one girl asked me, are we being videotaped? Are they going to post this anywhere? So yeah, it's a little unusual. Yeah, right? It'll be on YouTube tonight. So with all of that, how about something specific that you saw me doing as a teacher that you think caused something productive to happen on the part of the students?
Dr. Feldman, it was nice being in your class. And
Thank you.
It was really nice, having not met the students, for you to at least make the connection by talking about the Giants and the Tigers. I didn't know who you were, but that was a connection.
Yeah.
That was really neat.
Yeah.
That was something they all could relate to.
Yeah, I find if I only have seconds, it's still worth taking just a few seconds just to let them know I'm a human being and I do things other than, than school. So yeah, I appreciate that. And we saw great examples of that in every classroom today with teachers that obviously know the kids very, very well, and they still took a minute here and a minute there. It wasn't fluff. It wasn't, overly. It did not eat up a lot of time, but there was a personal relationship and a rapport and a respect, which is obviously the foundation for taking risks, the foundation for behaving appropriately. And if you invest in that bank, when you need to withdraw, i.e. have a tough conversation because the kid's over the line, you can get a lot more value out of it if we've invested it in that bank up front. Now you can make a few withdrawals and your account won't go, bottoms up. So thank you, Tracy. How about something else? Yeah.
I appreciated how you reviewed the target at the beginning of the lesson and then again at the end of the lesson, reminding them that this is what we're going to learn and this is what we learned.
Yeah, thanks. Good. How about something from the back side of the room? Back there, yes?
I really appreciated how you kept saying thank you for giving it a go to the students, to reaffirm that they're trying, that they're thinking, that you're giving them that praise from everyone.
Yes. Great, thanks. Right here, please.
I thought it was very effective that even though you told them that there wasn't a right answer, you followed up by saying it's the quality of your thinking. And I feel like, especially I'm an English teacher, and there's a lot of gray in regard to answering things, and it is really that. It is the quality of thinking that matters.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Ella, one or two more, yeah.
One thing I really liked is some of the praise that you offered students, and really was nice because you did two things with just one little praising statement. You mentioned that it was a good skill. And so in that you highlighted, this is what good learners do, and so hopefully they're picking up on, I should be doing that too. And also at the same time foster that growth mindset that they see that they can just, if I just do that, then I become a good student.
Yeah, wonderful. Yeah.
I was impressed with the rapidity with which you circulated around the room and how careful you were about listening to students and then later calling on those students who had pretty sophisticated answers.
Yes, yeah. Thank you, thanks. Appreciate that. Okay, we can cut it off there. Thank you very much. I feel very affirmed. So now you can rip me to shreds. No, now we can have the more open-ended and equally important questions, wonderings, and suggestions. So let's open it up. Yeah, Erin.
This is a question that I think maybe more than one of us have. And just because we're curious and we're all learning together and how we could do that. But when you were pressed for time, the engagement didn't lag. But it turned from reading and talking and evidence to more gestural, feedback, pro-response, and verbal. And I want to know, as a professional, how can I keep that rigor and the engagement up when I've got 5 minutes left to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I can talk about it, but there's no simple answer. So, in other words, you can't fully. Rigor takes time. Higher order thinking takes time. Explaining your thinking takes time. So the honest answer is you can't in 5 minutes. You can't do in 5 minutes what I could do in 15. That's just, I don't care who you are. You can be an elite archer or the world's best teacher, and you just can't. Time is a factor. Given that, we have to make instructional choices. And we could always argue this, and that'd be an interesting argument. It's the proverbial depth and breadth. Because this is in part introducing something I know Linda will be following up with. I was less concerned at the end about depth as I was about making sure. So I skipped over about 3 slides that we didn't even talk about, right? That I wasn't sure that I could squeeze in 25 minutes because I didn't know how much background knowledge they had. Linda had told me what she had taught, but just because we have taught it, does that mean they've learned it? Yes or no? No, obviously not, right? And I've made that erroneous assumption enough times that that took some time up front to unpack the checks and the balances, and I wanted them thinking about which one has more power and why and that sort of thing. Well, that ate into my judicial review and why is it controversial time. So that was a judgment call on my part, but when I saw, 5 minutes left, and we have all this. So I could have just skipped all of it and just ended and gone deeper right where we were and said, well, you know what? Linda will pick up checks our judicial review and its controversy. Or I could say, you know what? I want to introduce that because I said that's what our learning target was. So I made the choice to err on, and it's not even an error necessarily, but I made the choice that has consequences. You're exactly right. I love the way you very specifically named that. They were still engaged which I think was a plus, but they were engaged more superficially at responding globally, like a choral response. That's way different than explaining in a minute and a half with evidence. You betcha. It's not as rigorous, not as powerful, and so it was a choice, and choices have consequences. That's really all I can say about it. We could kick around whether or not, that was the optimal choice or the less than optimal choice, but it was a choice, it was conscious, and it does have consequences, and I think you pick them out with specificity. So it's a long-winded way of saying there ain't a right answer. Yes. Tell me your first name. Ashley. And you're the student teacher that allowed us in your classroom. You rock. Thank you so much. Ashley, shoot.
Okay, I love the speed and the pace that you have the lesson because it really keeps the kids engaged. But how do you deal with times that certain students are taking longer to take notes, or that wait time that students have, and keeping the other student engaged?
And boy, experienced teachers, raise your hand if that's a great question. Yes, and it's when there's not a great answer. So I can't, oh, here's the formula. Oh, good, now I know. And the answer is you got to wrestle with it. So it's always a, so my sort of euphemism would be you want to be as perky as possible, as patient as necessary. And so you're going to have to make choices. So there will be times when, if you go with the pace of the slowest, lowest background knowledge kid that needs the most support, you're going to kill the lesson for the rest of the class. If you go to the pace of the fastest processor, highest background knowledge, then you're going to leave at least 2/3 of the class in the dust. If we teach to the middle, then we're going to leave out on either side. So we have to be more precise in that. We have to do some things to the middle, some things where we make sure that we are differentiating for the higher, like who's got something else that we haven't heard, and then be cognizant of whether it's through sharing with a partner, through maybe picking it up later when the kids, maybe they were doing something independently, right, that then I could go back over and follow up with the 2 kids. Or I could even pull 3 kids with me while the others were taking 5 minutes to work on, begin their homework or something. So there's not a right answer there. But if I were to err, my own personal advice would be err on the side of perky, because it does keep it moving. And the kids will show you if you've been too perky and they're just losing it and hanging on by the fingernails, they'll show you got to slow down, because they will not. It's not in their notes. They're not able to when then you give the prompt and they are sharing with a partner and they go, "What are we supposed to do?" Or was I just boom right on by and they were like, "Huh?" So we don't want to be Roadrunner. So that's all I can really do is talk about it. And then what's most important is to be in and out of each other's classrooms and to tie the talk to real examples. Then we could get real specific about how we'd actually make that judgment call, given these kids, this content, my learning objectives in the lesson today in the unit as a whole. And any other teachers, feel free to weigh in, because that is a terrific question from our young student teacher that I would love to have anybody else that has to. Yes?
To go back to your exit slip, though, that's where I would you use your exit knowledge, what they tell you when they exit, to reteach the next day. If you've been too perky, so to speak, and
they'll show you. Absolutely.
They'll show you on your exit slip, and they don't have anything what you think they should know. It's not there, so you go back and reteach. I've done that several times where I start the next day reteaching what I thought they
based on what your informal and quick assessment was in the exit slip. And I loved, who was it that was sharing the strategy that they saw today with the numbers and the stickies? Yes, yeah. So would somebody mind just briefly sketching out one more time? I thought that was a brilliant, specific example of how to manage that. Who observed that? Yeah, great. So would you just give that just a 90-second review one more time so we can all make sure we have this in our head?
Sure. The teachers in the classroom asked the students to write anonymously for the class a learning target objective or their understanding of something, and then as the students were leaving in this particular classroom, they would post that response. And then teachers could very quickly assess who knew what, and there was a grid. So the teachers knew what student had responded.
So there was a grid of numbers that corresponded to the kids.
Right. Yeah. So the teacher, or the children, or the kids knew what number they were, and the teachers knew what number they were, but it wasn't publicly.
Public knowledge, right?
Thanks.
Yeah.
And then quickly the teachers could, between the classes switching, assess who looked like they got it, and they pulled those off and threw them away. And they left the sticky notes up for students who needed to revisit that idea and make it more correct.
Yes. And of course, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Now, and you could also play with that a variety of ways. You could have a list of maybe, let's say just for round numbers, let's say 2/3 of the kids demonstrated some getting it and 1/3 didn't. You could also pair them up strategically by those that got and those that didn't and say, okay, you have whatever 4 minutes I want you to highlight, and I want you guys ones, you're the speakers, and twos, you're the listeners. So it doesn't mean that we always have to be the ones who are reviewing again. It could be the students. And I would argue if we do that well, that would deepen the understanding of the person that gets it. They are, you know the cliche here, right? If you really want to know something, you should teach it. Well, why is it? It's not just doing it again. It's doing it differently. It's a different metaphor, paraphrase, example, and that's exactly what your students will do. And I would argue that's a win-win for the kids that know it. See, knowing isn't on or off, or like pregnancy, is or ain't. Knowing is a continuum of depth, right? And so one of the ways of deepening our knowing is to have to explain it differently to somebody else that didn't get it right away. And I would argue that promotes deeper learning for the quote-unquote knower, but also stretching our making up words here, but would also be helpful for the knowee, for the person that doesn't know it yet and needs to learn it. So we could use just that simple strategy, which is powerful, we could instructionally act on it in a variety of ways, and including strategically using the students. So great, thank you. Wonderful observations. Other questions, wonderings, or suggestions? Yeah?
We were talking about the learning targets.
Yes.
We have spent an ungodly amount of hours doing I can statements for all of our standards and lining everything with the Common Core and all that. And so our learning targets are expected to be on our board in those like I can statements directly related to the standards and all of that stuff. So my question for you was, do you typically do a learning target that is more specific to what you want them to be able to do, or do you typically leave it kind of broad like it was, like just beginning to unpack those two questions?
Well, it depends. So if this is the first time we've introduced it, and it was, then it's going to be broad. So I want them to be able to say something intelligible about judicial review and something intelligible about why it's controversial. Then I would say if we're, say, maybe 2 days from now, I would want it far more specific than just intelligible. I want them to be able to articulate, two important attributes of judicial review and one current controversy around judicial activism and support it. So it's still under the same thing, but when I'm just introducing something, I want global understanding, and when I'm, say, 3 or 4 days into it, right, then I want real specific, real detailed, higher level knowledge. If I'm going deep with that, maybe it's one that we're not going deep with, then I have to ask, in other words, you can't go deep too quickly. It's just deep and quick are oxymoronic. They just don't go together, right? So I think it's important with our learning targets that we don't make these robotic, sort of rote. See, if you look at the research here, it's ambiguous at best. So there's not a thou shalt with learning targets, not that I've seen any evidence for. I think what we do have evidence for is being clear on what we're attempting to teach, having kids being clear on what they're attempting to learn, being clear on where it fits in the larger picture of, say, a unit of instruction, and having our assessment be aligned with what we said was important. I think those things we have some pretty clear evidence for. The particulars of how we do it, I think there's many other bridges personally that I would want to die on long before that we'll all have. I think you can take way too much time on superficial. I would agree with John Hattie that we don't want to spend all of our time on things that are actually relatively superficial or of low power in terms of improving student achievement. And I would argue parsing words for how we word learning targets would be low level. I've not seen any high effect sizes based on parsing of the words. There are absolutely high effect sizes for alignment, for being clear what you're teaching, teach what you're teaching, students know what you're teaching, assess what you're teaching, and if they're not getting it, do something different to figure out how they can get it. That is a big idea that's really important. So I would argue that we want to be clear, and I'm not in any way invaluing, nothing wrong with doing it that way, just I wouldn't put all my intellectual capital and time about the parsing of the words. I put my intellectual and time in the teaching, assessing, reteaching, and going deeper with kids' understanding of these critical skills and concepts. That's my bias. That answer your question?
Yeah, fine.
more than
getting
that.
there, yeah.
Yeah, more than
And
that.
it's, I mean, it's something that we're still talking about all the time in our district.
Yeah.
And trying to figure out, you know, like here it is and here's what we want them to do. So how do we break it apart further for daily instruction? And that's why I was curious what you would put up for a learning target. Would it be the whole long picture goal or would it be the short?
No. It would absolutely be what's the target for today? What kind of learning are we going to be engaged in today? And that might be, and often will be, a subset of a much larger one. And like I indicated earlier, if the larger one was this whole issue of judicial activism and why it's so controversial in our politics today, that'd be a real nice connection to stuff that, you know, the kids' parents are arguing about and people are arguing about in pubs and in coffee houses, and, you know, and the Republicans and the Democrats argue about all the time. One person's activism is another person's making laws and exceeding the limits of the Supreme Court, and the justices, they argue about it. So this is one that's right in the wheelhouse of the public discourse. And it's cool that young people are at least being introduced to that, because they're not talking about it on Facebook with any regularity, I can guarantee you that. But beginning to introduce them. So yeah, the long-winded way of saying that the targets would change, and the way they're worded from more general outcomes, knowing something about it, being able to at least identify what it is and name it, to down here, give example or critique an example with both sides. That would be, even though it's the same overall topic, that would be my example. Rather, if we all have them general, not good, but if they're all so fine grained, you can sort of miss the forest because you're only focusing on spruce all the time. So we need both, right? And that's good instruction. It has to be like an accordion, where we're always connecting the particular to the global and then back again all the time. Because ultimately, the evidence as I see it is that the knowledge is changing all the time, and we're adding to it exponentially, that we want to make sure that one major forest is the quality of thinking. And we don't want to lose sight of, if we get so particular, right? I mean, behavioral objectives are not new. We've had them for 40, 50 years. And one of the fallacies is we can do what in science is called the reductionistic fallacy. We can take complex constructs and ideas, reduce them to what we thought were their constituent parts, focus on the parts. It's like the blind man and the elephant. And we never see elephant. We see tail and we think it's a this, we see the leg and we think it's a that, and we don't get the big picture. So I think tying it back to the big picture, right? I would argue that's why we have standards. That's what standards are. They're naming of these big picture things. Anyway, it's a complex thing. Obviously, just in the thinking out loud as you've asked me the question, there's not a simple answer here. But I think it's one worth conversing about, but don't let that distract you from the most important issue, is how do we teach and how do we assess, and what do we do if they're not learning it? That's about all, whatever that's worth.
I have a clarifying question, because I have read John Hetty, and one of the top things that he talks about all the time is student self-regulation and how that's really important. That's where I see these I can statements.
Yes.
So my question for you is, an I can statement does not have to be one standard, but it could be a level of standards, possibly to help the student move from the very superficial thinking to the very in-depth thinking, and that way we are getting to John Hetty that says the highest learning that any student can do is when they regulate themselves. So I think that's where some of the districts are using the I can statements to move them up that higher level of thinking. Is that what you were sort of explaining to a certain extent?
I don't know if I was or not.
Okay, that's what I was getting at.
Yeah, well, good, then I'll say yeah. I'll say, yep, I was. If it was good, then yes. Again, I would be less concerned with the way you frame it. I can statements. I'd be more confirmed about our kids learning self-assessment, self-regulation, and are they learning how to take responsibility for their own learning. And I would argue that's the point, not the particular way. So what I was trying to say is, don't spend too much time arguing about what doesn't matter. Focus on what does. The self-regulation matters desperately, not the wording of the I can statement. So here's what I want you to do. Get back with your tables, and here's the larger question. Not whether or not you do I can statements. The larger question is, are you, meaning you individually and you collectively, your school that you're here representing, do you teach students to self-assess, to self-monitor and track through, say, a unit of instruction, and to be clear themselves and be clear with you about where they are in their learning process? If you do, explain how you do it and how that's evolved and if it's working for you. And if you don't, is it something that you think is of value or not, or do you think it's superfluous and not worthy of your focus? So self-assessment, self-monitoring, self-regulation is the topic.